learning how to get yourself into a healthy mindset about your disorder is the first step in learning how to live well with it, because you have to accept that you have the disorder. Go through the grieving process. It's a normal thing to grieve when you have, when you're struggling with accepting your diagnosis, accepting who you are with the diagnosis, but don't get stuck in grief. And then you want to make sure that you don't compare yourself to other people. Don't compare yourself to your former self. Don't compare yourself to who you thought you were supposed to be. Don't compare yourself, because you can live well with your disorder. It might look different, but that doesn't mean it's bad. It's just different. And then the last thing about mindset that I want to talk about is the recovery cycle. So when I was first diagnosed, for probably probably the first 15 years, I viewed working towards wellness as like walking up a path on a mountain. I was trying to get to the top of the mountain, and that's where wellness was in my mind. But I viewed it as this linear path. So every time I would experience a mood cycle, I felt like I was falling back down to the bottom. And it was a really discouraging experience. It really was depressing. And I remember very clearly a few years ago, probably, I think it was 3 years ago, we had a really bad tragedy happen, and I was really struggling with my mental health. I got very depressed, and I had that thought. I thought, oh, I have to start all over again. I'm at the bottom now. And when I had that thought, I went to my therapist and I told her that. I said, I just feel like I'm trying so hard and I just keep falling down to the bottom. And she said, I don't think you're viewing working toward wellness in the right way. And she talked about how a lot of therapists are now starting to view wellness with bipolar like the recovery cycle with drug addiction. And I don't know if you can see this graphic that I have up. I have this on my website. So that this post on my website is called The Recovery Cycle. And I talk about how in drug addiction, the first two steps, pre-contemplation and contemplation, are where you're in denial about your illness or your disorder. You're in denial about it. The first one is there's no recognition at all, no acknowledgement at all. And then the second one is you acknowledge it, but you don't care about it and you're not going to do anything about it. And those two are the ones that you want to eliminate from the cycle. You want to, going back to that grief one and not comparing yourself, learn how to accept your disorder. Learn how to recognize I have bipolar and I need to learn how to accept it and how to work towards wellness with it. And then the next step is like figuring out a plan. What am I going to do? How am I going to do this? And then implementing the plan. And then once you get to that point, then you can get to a point where you're in maintenance mode. And the goal with bipolar is to spend longer and longer periods of time in maintenance mode. And the tool that I developed for myself to help with this is I used to call it the Mental Health Emergency Response Plan. If you've heard of it before by that name, I have renamed it. And the reason I renamed it is because it was confusing to people. When I say mental health emergency response, some people hear like a crisis thing. For me, it was a crisis. Every time I would experience a mood cycle, I felt like I was having a crisis. I felt like my family was in crisis. And so I created this plan thinking, okay, I'm having a mental health emergency, so this is the plan. But I've actually changed it to the Mood Cycle Survival Guide now to help people understand this is for helping you learn how to proactively manage your mood cycles. So when you experience it, you don't feel like, oh, I've failed. Now I have to start at the bottom again. You just think, nope, I know what to do right now. If you're in mania, you have a plan for that. If you're in depression, you have a plan for that. But the 4 pieces of that are who are your team? Who are the people that you can go to for help? Your doctor, your therapist, your partner. If you have childcare for your children, who are the team? Who are the people you can ask for help when you're in that space? The second piece of it is identifying your early warning system. And the early warning system is really important. Learning how to identify when you're either entering or in a manic or depressed state is really important, because then you can say, okay, I'm manic right now. So for me, I didn't spend money. I had to give my husband my credit cards when he could see that I was getting manic. when I was depressed, I had to call in reinforcements, but recognizing that I was in that state was really critical. So learning how to recognize what the symptoms are that you're in that state, also recognizing triggers. So moving is a trigger for me. We have moved 6 times, and every time I get hypomanic and then I get depressed. Once we figure that out, we recognize this is a trigger, so I'm going to prepare myself for the inevitable mood cycle so that we can manage it more effectively. The third piece is learning how to manage your emotional resources, identifying what the priorities are for those emotional resources. So making sure when I was manic, I would forget to feed my kids. I would get going on big projects. I would, have all the stuff that I was doing, and I would forget to feed them. My poor children were like going through cupboards trying to find something to eat. And so that was one of the things that was on my list when I was manic is you have to feed your children. And I would set alarms for myself to make sure that I remembered to feed my kids. When I was depressed, I kept trying to do everything, and then I could do nothing, and it made it worse. And so making sure that my kids got to school, making sure that they ate, making sure that the things that were most important got done, and then I let go of the rest of it. And then the last piece of it is learning how to get yourself back to maintenance mode. So that's that recovery cycle. You create a plan for yourself to get yourself back into a healthy, balanced mental state. And if you haven't developed a mood cycle survival guide for yourself, it's free on my website. I have a whole guide. I've got videos and I've got the, written section directions for how to develop this for yourself. It's free. So go download it and do it for yourself. It is an amazing tool that will help you learn how to be more proactive about managing your mood cycles while you're learning how to live well with your disorder. So these 3 blog posts, if you haven't read them, like I said, go onto my blog and check them out. You can get more information. There's a lot more detail in there about each of these topics. But learning how to get yourself into a healthy mindset about your disorder is the first step in learning how to live well with it, because you have to accept that you have the disorder. Go through the grieving process. It's a normal thing to grieve when you have, when you're struggling with accepting your diagnosis, accepting who you are with the diagnosis, but don't get stuck in grief. And then you want to make sure that you don't compare yourself to other people. Don't compare yourself to your former self. Don't compare yourself to who you thought you were supposed to be. Don't compare yourself, because you can live well with your disorder. It might look different, but that doesn't mean it's bad. It's just different. So don't compare yourself to other people. And then the last thing, of course, is the recovery cycle. Understanding what wellness looks like is really important, so that when you have a mood cycle, you don't view it as failure. It's not a failure. You're just changing where you are in the cycle, and you know what you need to do to get back to wellness, to get back to a maintenance mode and a healthy mental space.